Hey guys, Xlice here. Fate Collab Round 2 is finally here, which means that Gilgamesh is free to take home in HSR. If you're a fan of the king of all heroes, or enjoy the Saber ult spam team, then Gil will be a super fun investment for your lineup. Of course, you can actually pick up another copy of Archer, but I'm always a fan of more units, more fun. In this complete and detailed guide, I'll explain everything you need to know about Gilgamesh. We'll start with what he does in combat, and I'll summarize everything useful in his kit, then go through his best builds, weapons, and relics, his Eidolons, best teammates, run through a proper gameplay showcase, and give you a final review on if you should pull him. Disclaimer on screen to this creator server, and with that out of the way, let's get into it. So, Gil is a lightning destruction character who's going to spam his ult and skill as much as possible while engaging in some friendly or not so friendly banter with Saber, if she's on the team. His ult cost is 360, which is the same as Saber, and just like her, Gil has super easy ways to generate ult energy so he can fire off his beautiful Enuma Elish. While Saber and Gil are far from friends with each other, in HSR they do happen to team up together pretty well, and most of you will most likely gravitate to the following team comp: Saber, Gil, Tribi, and Huohuo. So let's go over what he does in combat. Immediately upon entering the battlefield, there are one or two things you need to pay attention to. His tooltip number will count his unique mechanic called Interest. At the beginning of combat, if Gil acts before this number reaches 10, his turn will automatically play with him using his basic attack. Now, the instant it reaches 10, he enters the Interest Peak state, which he remains in until the end of combat. In this state, he will only be able to use his skill, which costs 0 SP, but since he won't be able to basic attack anymore, he also doesn't generate any SP. Every point of interest grants him 10% speed with no limit. The 10% is based off of his base speed. However, when it's his turn, he must use his skill, and using it resets all of his interest back to 0. So the main purpose of this interest amount is just to speed him up until it's his turn. So, ways that he gains interest. Technique provides 3. Any ally taking action grants 1. And any ally, including himself, that uses ult grants 2. Now there's a second thing you need to pay attention to, which only applies if Saber is also on the team. This is their joint follow-up counter. It goes up by 1 when only Gil or Saber attacks. And when it hits 8, they launch a joint follow-up attack that deals damage and provides the following bonuses. Gil gains 3 interest, Saber gains 120 fixed energy. Saber also gains 2 times or double damage on her next ultimate. So only Gil and Saber can increase this counter, so 8 is actually quite a bit. It's pretty important since it doubles Saber's ult damage, so this can influence their builds a bit for more action count. Besides that, his main source of damage will be his ultimate. It's basically the same as Saber's, dealing initial AoE damage and then 10 instances of bounce damage. 360 energy is quite a juicy amount, so he's going to rely on this special passive. When other allies use their ult, Gil gains fixed energy equal to 30% of its consumed amount. So a 100 energy ult gives him 30, 200 gives him 60, etc. And then his skill is a lot weaker in terms of damage, but you will use it every turn, so you can take what you can get. It also provides him 30% ignored defense for 3 turns, which is perma uptime since he skills every turn anyway. So overall, Gil's playstyle basically plays itself. You ult whenever it's available to not waste energy, unless the enemy has like 1 HP and there's another wave coming, and when it's his turn, he just uses skill because there's nothing else to do. Let's finalize some things and then get to his builds. Gil gains 40% ult damage bonus, basically perma. He also gains 25% crit damage per interest stacking up to 6 times. Once you ramp this up at the beginning of the fight, it stays permanently, so view it as 150% free crit damage. When Gil is on field, all allies gain 20% attack and 20% crit damage. If an ally has over 140 energy, they gain an extra 1% attack and crit damage per 1 max energy. This caps at 100 attack and 100% crit damage at 240 total energy. These buffs also apply to himself, so in total, he gains 40% ult damage bonus, 100% attack, and 250% crit damage for free. Trace nodes give him 18.7 crit rate, 18% attack, and 8 damage bonus. Leveling priority will be on screen. We're going to get the skill up for the ignore defense, ult for damage, and talent for that extra damage bonus. Now let's take a look at his light cones. So his signature provides 18% attack, 10% ER, 72% ult damage bonus, and all allies gain 24% crit damage. Everything here is 100% uptime on buffs. So the most valuable thing here is the 24% crit damage for all allies, which is pretty nice if you plan to pair him with Saber. Otherwise, destruction light cones have an okay number of options. Pull for signature if you value the team crit damage and personal stat boosts. Saber's signature will be second best. Pretty unsurprising since they both revolve around a max energy bonus, 36% crit damage, 80% attack, and 10% refund on energy. ENS5 will also be pretty solid. The attack percent is fairly diminishing, but it's still a good free option. And that's it for decent 5-star options. Everything else is fairly mediocre. 4-star, a Bygone Blood will provide the most unconditional bonuses. It's free a 12 to 20% crit rate and 24 to 40% skill and ult damage depending on copies. And finally, 4-star Secret Vow for 20 to 40% damage bonus. For my personal recommendations, if you aren't able to grab his signature, I would stick to Saber Sig, Eon S5, or Bygone Blood. Now running through Relics. So his 4-piece options don't have any super crazy best-in-slot setup, so he kind of has some flexibility depending on what you want to run. We have 4-piece Scholar and 4-piece Wave Strider, which are two pretty universal sets. I would recommend either one of these if you plan to run him in a generic team without Saber. If you do include Saber, we really value high action count. So 4-piece Eagle is really solid option that synergizes with us constantly ulting. And because of the amount of stat that his buffs provide, we don't really lose too much from dropping a DPS 4-piece set, and Eagle allows us to have better uptime on joint follow-up attack. For planner ornaments, his best in slot will be 2-piece Life Sciences Institute for a simple 32% damage bonus. This 2-piece set will also be Saber's new best in slot, so if you're interested in this lineup, be ready to farm a second set. For main stats, we are going a pretty standard DPS build. Crit body, speed or attack boots, damage over attack orb, and attack rope. Body is always crit, we want to reach 100% crit rate in combat. He gets an insane 250% crit damage bonus, so really prioritize crit rate body first. His team setups don't generally have a crit rate booster, so reaching as close to 100% on the stat page is recommended. For boots, speed or attack, both get diminished pretty heavily. His interest is calculated off of base speed, so speed boots is effectively just 3 interest. For attack, he obviously gets 100% attack, so choose whatever you have the best subsets on. For orb, damage over attack since he lacks damage bonus sources, and then for rope, we prefer attack since his energy is mostly from fixed sources. These are all baseline recommendations. Optimal builds will also depend heavily on light cone choice, team comp, and difficulty of content. So when you've got a full build, this is what you can approximately expect. Base or 122 speed with speed boots, as close to 100% crit rate as possible, crit damage as high as possible, attack as needed, and 100% energy regen, or 110% actually. High-end builds with 4 to 5 subset rolls on each piece can probably achieve the following: as much attack as possible like before, 100% crit rate, and 175 plus crit damage. This will turn out to be 425 plus in combat. Now let's run through his Eidolons. E1. Skill now grants team-wide 30% ignore defense, self 60% attack, and an extra flat 40 energy. Honestly, this is kind of crazy value. It provides increased team damage, increased personal damage, and significantly higher ult uptime. If you get E1, then 4-piece Eagle goes crazy. E2, a slight interest boost at the beginning to ramp up a bit faster, and his skill now effectively deals double damage. E4, 20 energy regen. It's mostly a filler since most of his energy is fixed. And then E6, team-wide 20% res pen. Ultimate bounce multiplier is 80% stronger. And then teammate ults now provide a stack of 100% crit damage for Gil's ult. So if we use 3 teammate ults before his, it grants him 300% extra ultimate crit damage. Now because of this, at E6, we don't really value the 4-piece Eagle set as much anymore, since we want more teammate ults in between his. So he'll switch back to like 4-piece Scholar or Wave Strider for raw stat bonuses. Overall, his Eidolons turn him into an ult nuker over a spammer. E1 is a massive threshold to aim for, E2 is okay, E4 is filler, and E6 is clip-worthy nuke damage. If I have time, I'll try to showcase E0 to E6 on my second channel, so don't forget to follow me over there. Alright, now for teams and showcases. So Gilgamesh is basically an ult nuker that relies on allies using their ultimate very frequently to charge zone. He can either form an alliance with Saber, or we can just build him into a generically strong ult comp. For the Saber comp, we run Gil, Saber, plus support flex, and Huohuo. Huohuo is pretty necessary to ult funnel both Saber and Gil, and then our flex slot can be any of the following: Tribby, Sparkle, Sunday, or Mort Blade. For my own showcase, I've chosen an E0 Tribby with S5 DDD, since she ults very frequently and DDD adds a more action count for the whole team. But any of those other options are pretty good. Besides that, we can also run a generically strong all-male comp like follows: Gil plus Mort Blade plus Ashvale plus DHPT or Huohuo. Gil's the primary carry of this comp, with Mort Blade and Ashvale supplying consistent ults and solid chip damage. DHPT stays within the all-male lineup, but of course, Huohuo will perform better overall due to her ult funneling capabilities. And finally, for a general team template, he basically just needs the following: high energy DPS like Evanesia, the Herta, Argenti, and of course Saber. Any support like Tribi, Sparkle, Sunday, or Mort Blade, and then a sustain like DHPT or Huohuo. Overall, his teams end up being mostly dual DPS comps, with Gil doing super nice AoE damage and your high energy DPS also doing a bunch. First, let's take a look at the Saber Gil dual DPS comp. This will likely be the most popular comp if you've invested in Saber because she's now a lot stronger with Gil on the team. Against MOC Starward mode, this team is able to perform a clean one cycle clear, and here are the most important findings from my testing. This team feels pretty good when both Saber and Gil are on 4-piece Eagle. Combined with S5 DDD Tribi, the action count is pretty damn high, which makes the joint follow-up attacks a lot more common, leading to stronger Saber ults. Gil reaches 10 interest basically right away due to the combo of Huohuo ult and Tribi ult at the beginning of combat, so we will never see Gil's basic attack. SP pressure is very light. Saber is SP positive, Gil is SP neutral, Tribi is SP positive, leaving Huohuo able to skill every turn for maximum ult uptime. These enemies are only lightning weak, so Gil's damage feels substantially stronger than Saber's. Both are doing their job though, and even though MOC is typically single target favored, the bounce damage from their ults contributes to a healthy amount of single target damage. Because Saber and Gil are both on 4-piece Eagle here, we generally always want to ult after they take their turn to get maximum action value boost. However, for Gil, this ends up being situational since he does gain so much energy constantly from teammate ults, so play this by ear. Now let's move to the all-male setup. Gil is the star of this comp and will be dealing the most amount of damage. Mort Blade is our strongest standalone sub DPS, and Ashvale supplies a good chunk of single target focus. Huohuo is preferred over DHPT for obvious energy reasons, but we're sticking with DHPT for that male-only lineup. Against MOC Starward mode, this team is able to perform a 1-cycle clear, and honestly could push 0 cycle with possibly better planning. Here are the most important findings from my testing. Highest priority for this comp is maintaining Mort Blade's ult state. He typically only will get enough energy to use his damaging ult once per enhanced state, so definitely keep tabs on his ult's countdown on the action bar. Depending on skill points, DHPT may need to basic attack, but Ashvale, Mort Blade, and Gil will usually always skill. Gil's damage is much more nuke focused rather than spamming his ult, so make sure you unload at the right time. Overall, I was actually quite surprised how strong this lineup ended up being, and was even more impressed by how much damage Gil was able to do when everything was set up properly. So, is it worth grabbing the free Gil over another copy of Archer? I'd say it depends on which comp you want to invest in more. If you've watched the Rin guide and decided, hey, I like the SP comp more, then investing in Archer might be a bit more effective. But personally, I do think having at least one copy of all the fake characters just makes your account feel a bit more complete, you know what I'm saying? But overall, I think that Gil relies on one of two things for like the meta. He really wants to be paired with Saber for those joint follow-up attacks, or Mort Blade for massive buffs. And second, he really does value Huohuo for her ult funneling. Now that being said, Huohuo has pretty much been best in slot for every team recently, so it may be difficult to free her up to support Gil. Those of you who do plan to go all the way to E6 Gil, you should have a fun time nuking the shit out of your enemies. If I have time, I will be showcasing his E0 to E6 on my second channel, so be sure to check that out over there. Now, whether you grab him for free and or decide to pull extra copies for him, I wish you the best of luck. Let me know in the comments what you think. Don't forget to like and sub for complete character guides and summon videos. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Take care.